Today I'm going to be showing you how to play the Evans Gambit for beginners. I'm going to be going over how to play the Evans Gambit, some common moves and concepts within the positions. Now, like all gambits, the whole point of this is you sacrifice material early on in the game to get an advantage in development. This is a very common opening for beginners, and I definitely recommend you learn it if you don't already know how to play it, because even if you're not playing it, chances are someone's going to play it against you when you're playing with the black pieces. Not just that, but I think it's a very strong opening and teaches you a lot of core principles about how to sacrifice just a pawn to get a good attack out the opening. There are so many different variations and moves within the Evans Gambit if you go into a lot of the variations, so I'm just going to show some key concepts of how to play it and what the common themes are so you can play these. So the Evans Gambit starts with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. Now this is the Italian game, and this is a very common opening for beginners all the way up to expert level. And this is another reason why I like the Evans Gambit, because it transpires from an Italian game, and this is a very commonly played position. And now the Evans Gambit begins when you play pawn b4, essentially sacrificing this pawn. And the whole point of this gambit is that white takes the pawn with either the bishop or the knight, and then you play c3 and d4 to get a solid centre for white. So we're going to be looking at a few common positions within this gambit, and the first one we're going to be looking at is what happens if knight takes his pawn. So if knight takes the pawn, then you're going to be playing c3, and then when the knight moves back, you're then going to be playing d4. And the whole point of this is white has a very strong centre, an active knight and bishop, and is ready to castle on the next move. And depending on what black does next, obviously they can trade pawns and then move the bishop back, or they can just move the bishop back. White might even want to push his pawn further to attack this knight, which removes this pawn's defender. Now in this position here, white can actually take this pawn, winning the pawn back while controlling the centre. And once you get into a position like this, yes, white has the double pawns, but it stops black's knight developing to the f6 square, so once black's knight develops here instead, you can simply just castle, white's okay here. Oftentimes, in the Evans Gambit, black won't actually take with the knight because it automatically removes this pawn's defender. So oftentimes you're going to see black take with the bishop, and this is probably the most common variation. And then once you play c3, black has a few options here, and the most commonly played moves are probably a5 and c5. But black can also go all the way back to e7 with the bishop, which is a more stable variation. So if black does go a5 as an example, white can play d4 following the same move, and if black takes the d4 pawn, white can actually castle here. And the whole point is, if black then takes this pawn as well, and on paper here it looks like black's doing a great job being up 3 pawns, white can play this move b3, attacking the e7 pawn. And let's just say, for example, black defends by playing queen f6, white can then develop the bishop attacking the queen, and it can get quite uncomfortable for black. Now in this position, the engine says that white is just slightly better, but it's pretty much a draw. But the whole point of this is that overall it's just quite uncomfortable for black. White could end up winning this pawn back. And even though you've sacrificed pawns, once you bring the rooks onto the E and D file, white can enjoy quite open play. If in this position, black plays the move e7, which is probably more uncommon, white can just castle before attempting to take the centre. And let's say black plays knight f6, which is common here, attempting to castle short. You can play the move d4 for white, and then if black takes on d4, you can actually push the e5 pawn now. And this is quite uncomfortable for black because there's no real great squares for black's knight to go. Their best move here is to play knight e4, but then you can move your rook over to e1, and this is very strong for white. Also after this, black's probably going to have to move the knight again, and you can just take this pawn and enjoy the centre for white as well. Another common move in the Evans Gambit in this position and other positions is black actually going a5 with the knight to try and attack this bishop. But once black plays knight f5, there's a few things you can do here, but the most common one is actually just bringing it back to e2 to defend it. In some variations you can actually sacrifice the bishop on f7. This one specifically, I'd say you can actually go for that, because once takes and takes, you can actually win the knight. And then let's say black takes this pawn, you can go d5, and this is completely winning for white, as you just win this knight over here. Chances are at beginner level, they're not going to play this move a5, but they might, so it's just something to just be aware of. Once the bishop takes and you go c3, probably the most common move I see at beginner level is just to bring the bishop back to c5, which is where it originally was. And here I recommend just playing d4 straight away, attacking the centre. And the whole concept here really is whether you trade or the bishop just goes back, you can just keep pushing his pawns up the board. But the whole point here is once they move the bishop back, you enjoy the centre, so keep pushing his pawns up the board. So you can choose to push this pawn now to attack the knight, or you could castle, develop the queen on b3 to go against this f7 pawn. But ultimately there's multiple moves you can make here. If let's say you play a position like this and knight plays f6, you might want to play b3 attacking this. And then let's say black castles, you can actually go g5, and there's a lot of pressure on this f7 pawn. I'm not saying this position's winning by any means, but it is definitely very uncomfortable for black. And either way, if you don't get an advantage out of a position like this, you've only sacrificed one pawn. Another idea in positions like this is to actually bring the bishop out to a3, and what you're doing here is, because white's about to castle probably on the next move, black hasn't got a clear way to actually castle, because this bishop a3 stops black from castling. So black has actually got to make 1, 2, 3 moves before they can castle, which means white can gain a good lead in development in that time. Another common theme in the Evans Gambit is, let's say black has a knight on f6, and let's say white castles here, and then black decides to trade the pawns. You can always push this pawn, which is a very common move, ignoring what black's doing here by winning pawns, and you're just pushing in the centre. And let's say black moves the knight back, white oftentimes will move the rook over to e1 and just help push this pawn up the board. And if you're in this position and you play d4 with the bishop on c5, and let's say black takes this pawn, I actually recommend castling straight away, because if black then tries and takes another pawn, you've got this strong trap where you can actually sacrifice the bishop now on f7, and then when black takes back, you can simply go d5 check with the queen and win the bishop. But not just that, but you're completely opening up black's pieces here. So before I even take the bishop, once black moves back with the king, I actually go check, and when black pushes the pawn to g6, then I take the bishop. And the whole point of this is, let's say black plays a random move next turn, like pushes his pawn to kick the queen, I can take this pawn and now I'm directly threatening black's rook. And white's already winning in this position, but after I take the rook it's going to be pretty much game over. And black has no development on this side of the board, and the king's wide open. Meanwhile I've already castled and the white king's actually safe. If you're in a position in Evans Gambit where they don't accept the pawn, then you can just carry on playing a normal game really. I wouldn't actually recommend doing much. I think one thing that is worth doing is playing a4 and pushing these pawns on the queen side a bit to put black under some pressure. But let's say you're here and black just moves back, then you might want to play a4 and just push these pawns up the board. Obviously you want to try and kick this knight out really, because then it removes this pawn's defender, and chances are you might win a pawn in the centre of the game. But the whole point of the Evans Gambit and why I like to play it is, there's not one set trick where you win a piece or you win the game at the opening, but the whole point is you're just sacrificing that one pawn, and in some cases even 2 pawns, where you just put this immense pressure on black's position. And if black doesn't know what they're doing, they can end up losing the game quite easily. So I do recommend playing the Evans Gambit, learning it, and learning the best moves in the defence of black as well, because if you do know the Evans Gambit as black, then you can defend against it quite easily. I hope you've learned something from this video about the Evans Gambit, and you can take something away that you can use in your games.